Welcome to another edition of the Business and Personal Podcast, where we bring you closer to the people you do business with. And today we're joined by Sean Hodgson, the owner of Motor City Float. He's had that company for the last 5 years. And we're going to talk about flotation therapy today. Everybody's trying to find a different way to cope with a pandemic. And I thought this would be a great thing to talk about as an option that people should consider. So, Sean, first of all, thanks so much for joining us today. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Ryan.
So,
Doing good.
When I was thinking about this category and who I wanted to have on, you came first to mind. I met you a few years ago and really liked your story about how you became obsessed about floating, basically, and turned it into a business for yourself. So why don't you talk about that a little bit and what got you into floating?
Yeah, I'll give you the short version. I think it was probably 2012, maybe 13, somewhere around in there, that I'd always been into health and wellness, more so physically part of the wellness part of it. And so I worked out a lot, ate certain things, did this and did all that. And I did this for years. I actually was 25 pounds heavier. And but as I was doing this, I noticed as I got older, I wasn't feeling the greatest still, even after doing all these things that I thought we're supposed to be doing. So I kind of looked at it and thought to myself, well, something's not right, because I had brain fog and I was having all these mental issues dealing. I felt physically I was okay, but the mental part of it was just not clear. And so I started doing more research on alternative wellness and ways to help get better mental clarity. And I came across a few podcasts that dealt in this realm, and then just through changing my workout habits, my wellness, my mental habits, started meditating, just started doing things a little differently, started going down a different path. And then it wasn't until I had been listening to a podcast with Tim Ferriss, who was on Joe Rogan at the time, Joe Rogan's podcast, that they were talking about mental health and ways you could change things and just different modalities that would really help. And they were mentioning a lot of things, such as saunas, meditation, cryotherapy, and some things like that. But then when Joe Rogan got to floating, he had started talking about this, and it immediately opened my eyes. I was like, well, what is this? This sounds amazing. Just sounds perfectly something I need to try. So right after that, I kind of got on this search of where could I try this? And it really wasn't, there was one place in Michigan that I went and tried. And my first float I did, it was okay. It was different. It was hard to kind of get to it and stuff. The environment itself wasn't conducive to floating, but I knew there was something to it. I could feel it. As soon as I got out, my body felt better. I was de-stressed. Just all these things were coming about, and I was having these thoughts, and I was like, man, there's something to this. This would be nice to expand upon what's here and make it a little bit better in terms of just like the atmosphere and everything. So with that, I did some more research on this floating, and then albeit I found out there was a float conference, and then there was a float apprenticeship, all these things. I was like, oh my God, I never knew this existed. And literally within like a week, I bought a ticket to the float conference happening, I think maybe a couple months later, and followed that up with an apprenticeship, still not knowing that I was going to even try to open a float center. I was just like, I want to dive into this more and figure out all this stuff. And so I dove head first into it and went to the conference, met a ton of great people in this community, float community, who came from all walks of life. You don't just learn floating. You don't go to school and say, oh, I'm going to own a float center. Like, these are people who were doctors, who were people who own car repair shops, just all walks of life, coming from where their background was to open their own float center because they believed truly in it and they knew the benefits of it. So I met all these wonderful people and just kept inspiring me and kept triggering this in my mind. You got to do this. You got to do this. And then I stayed on after the conference and did an apprenticeship where I actually got to work inside the float center and just get the feel for it. And then I started meeting clients that would come in and use floating and talking with them a little bit. And it was really, really cool. And one thing that really stuck out to me there when I was doing that was, and I still always to this day, it's great, is like I was sitting there kind of waiting for my turn to do my own floats. As part of the apprenticeship is you got to float while you're there as many times you want. And a group of 6 people had come through the door, and I heard them talking, they were chatting, and I said to the lady that sat down, I was like, hey, what do you guys are all coming in? Is this your first float? And they're like, no, this is, we come here maybe once a month to do this. I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I said, well, where are you guys all from? And they had said they were from Nike. They come from Nike. They use it as a way to go into a float, think out what they're doing creatively wise, and then they come out and they would meet and go have coffee and sit and creatively concept, brainstorm some project with Nike, whatever that may be. Right there, I was like, wow, that's pretty damn cool. Like, these people from Nike are coming down, because it was in Portland. I guess I should say that was where the conference and the apprenticeship was. So, and after that, I was really hooked, and I came home, did a lot of research, did a lot of figuring things out. With luck would have it, I met a great guy to help become a partner with me, and believed in me, still believes in me, and believes in the whole floating. And yeah, we put together a plan and tackled it, and now I have a float center for 5 years now. 5 years, I think so. Time just goes. You're like in the grind all the time. So yeah, that's the short answer.
Yeah, and I'm sure you could talk about that forever, but that sets the table really well for why you are where you are right now. And Sean, for people that have never floated, maybe heard about it a little bit, but don't really know a lot about it, just talk about exactly what it is. What are you floating in? How does it work?
So,
how long of a float do you suggest for people? Just maybe go into a little bit more
yeah.
detail.
So when we say floating, we're talking about, in our case, we have float cabins. A lot of people who may have heard of floating or just learning about it will see something called a float pod. Float cabins tend to be a little larger, and it's basically a really extremely large tub where there's about it can be between 800 to 1,100 pounds of Epsom salt in about 10 inches of water that's heated to about skin temperature, where you float, and you float effortlessly in the dark, no sound, no sight. Your stimulus is basically taken away, and it just allows your body to get into the most purest and deepest relaxation possible, period. There's just no other way to get that deep. Yeah, and there's just tremendous benefits to it. So
And you can have music streamed in there too, like through your phone
yeah,
or whatnot.
yeah, you can. We have options, so you can play music on your phone, or we have set up some soundtracks that have meditation. We actually have a great meditation of a lady who at another float center in California put together, where she kind of walks first time floaters who maybe have that hesitant being in there, where it kind of guides you through the float. So it's a cool meditation that's for floating specifically, with the lights and the breathing and all that. And yeah, and then yeah. A lot of people will bring a playlist in and play it on the phone in there.
And just to manage expectations, like you said, your first float wasn't exactly perfect. It got better every time the more you did it. So people should just kind of temper their expectations a little bit and not expect it to be perfect after the first one. But how many floats do you suggest for people before they really get the hang of it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because that comes up a lot. And yeah, like I said, my first float wasn't, it was good. I don't know if it was bad. It was just the environment itself. It just didn't feel like it was conducive for the float. But a lot of people, well, I should say a lot of people, but there are people who come in and have a hard time in that first float. My wife, for example, she got out within 10 minutes, her first float, and was thinking, oh my God, my husband wants to open a business doing this and I can't even do it. And it took her 3 floats. And that tends to be the area of where it hits the most with people is on that 3rd float. The first float, you'll never get a first float like you've always had. I mean, you're either going to have this crazy adventurous float, or it's going to be just a good float and you're going to feel calm and relaxed afterwards. Or you might have that float where you're like, I just can't do this. I can't shut my mind off, all these things, which is okay. You've never been in an environment like that, so it can be typical. That's the whole, it becomes a practice. So we encourage people to minimum do 2 floats. Do that 3rd float, which we have an intro pack, which we encourage everyone who comes in the first time to try and get that intro pack, because that's 3 floats. And by that 3rd float, you'll know if floating is for you. And majority of people, it's for them. And you know, it takes about 3 floats to get into it. And it's funny because we do have a lot of people who come in who kind of have heard through floating through how I heard of it, through Joe Rogan. So they're like, come in with these expectations of they're going to go to another level and all these things and all that. And I always tell them, don't have any expectations. Joe Rogan has had a float tank for 15 years or something like that, does what he does. He's a guru at how he floats. Like, that's not going to happen for you. So I don't want you to feel like if you don't get to any of these levels when you're done, that like, it's not. It takes time. It's a practice, man. I tell everyone, it's like you go to the gym. You don't go to the gym to build muscle one day. It becomes a practice. Now, you don't have to go every day, but it's something you build into a routine. It becomes that practice. And the more you do it, that brain really absorbs it. The body absorbs it. Becomes one with it. And so, yeah, it's a practice. So at least, yeah.
And the other thing I think that's interesting about floating is the wide range of people that could use it and benefit from it. You hear about a lot of athletes, even actually professional sports teams that have these tanks in their facilities. So certainly for athletes and recovering from injuries, it's a great thing. For people that have depression or anxiety, it's a great thing. What are maybe some of the other things that you've seen that have been a benefit of floating?
Those are good ones that probably most people are familiar with, athletes. But some people may not know more about is we've had a few people, children who suffer from autism, that have floated with us for quite a while, and it really helps to calm them, because imagine the chaos we hear when you're autistic. The chaos that they have is just amplified times 10, maybe even 100. And one particular child, Donovan, would float with us all the time. Unfortunately, they moved away, so I'm assuming they found another float center wherever they moved to. But they would float with us maybe once, twice a week for Donovan, and they just noticed tremendous benefits for him, just calming him down. And he was higher on the spectrum. So, and they actually used it as a reward for him, to tell him, hey, we want to go float, and to help him calm him down at home and kind of refocus him. And so it has tremendous benefits for children and people who suffer from autistic traits. And then I'm just trying to think, there's so many, there's so many benefits for so many different people. Floating just kind of brings that out in you, because it's very simple. And it's really just going back to being in the womb of sorts, like you're relaxed, you have no stress externally. I think that's the biggest factor, is there's no external stress. Our bodies are always under external stress. Even when you meditate, you're sitting, unless you know how to float. You have a point of contact, so your brain is firing to register that pressure. So when you take all that away, that sensory, is gone, and actually it starts working inward. So it has a lot more benefits when you're starts to heal the inside. I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
No, that's great. Like I had never thought of the autism angle and being able to help with those issues, and I hadn't thought of even kids floating either. So, what age range of people have you seen that have used floating?
Our youngest person, I believe, was 7-year-old girl. My wife would know for sure. And you would think, not all kids are, the same. Some kids get in there think it's a swimming pool. No, but this young lady was really well off, and like her. I think it started because of her mother was into alternative medicine, meditated, and did certain things. So she kind of was brought up like that. So she really got it. So, but floating is for everyone who can, even when you're a young child, if you can understand just the calmness and the relaxation part of it. And then, I never met, another thing that we didn't mention was, it's a depression for floating, but also people who suffer from PTSD has tremendous benefits for people who suffer from brain trauma. We've had a few people in there who have been major accidents and really were utilizing floating every day. Every day they were there, boom, boom, boom. They would do our unlimited package and they would be there, and then when they felt like they had reached a point, they kind of tapered off and do it once a month here and there. But that's the thing. They could feel it. They could feel their brain just really returning to how it needs to be.
And what would you suggest for beginners, like a 30-minute float? Like you don't want to come right out of the gate and do like a really the longest float you can do. Probably start with a shorter one and build from there.
I mean, we don't offer 30 minutes. We offer 60 minutes. 60 minutes tends to be where most people their first time get to. But that doesn't mean you don't have to stay in there for 60 minutes. We always tell people, hey, if you go 30 minutes and you feel like you're done, get out. You don't have to stay in there. Like no pressure, ease yourself into it. We want everyone to experience floating in a way that helps them relax. And whether it's with some music, with some lights, ultimately the goal would be to have none of that stuff. But do what's going to need for you to help you feel relaxed and shut off all that external stimulus for the most part. So, yeah.
Okay. So don't really like talking about this topic. We're all burned out on it, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners would have questions about how you've adjusted to COVID. And having been in your facility, I know like even before COVID, cleanliness is top of the list. Like you couldn't have had a much cleaner facility than you had. So a lot of it's just doing what you've been doing. But what other adjustments have you made in the wake of COVID?
Yeah, well, I'll just touch on the cleanliness because the first thing is because when somebody hears of a float center, I mean, even today, look at the schedule. We constantly have new people. Floating is constantly being learned by people, word of mouth and spread. So when you come to a float center for the first time, and there's not many of them. So when you go to one, you want it to be clean because if somebody else, and that's like, it's part of the whole float industry. Like we pride ourselves on everyone together collectively needs to be on top of their cleanliness. This is before COVID. And so when somebody comes and they see something that they have a bad experience, they're going to think, well, every float center is like that. That's not true. So we pride ourselves on making sure everything is tip-top shape, cleanliness, the water's filtrated through, this major process of ultraviolet lighting, ozone is injected into it. And then we have, in our case, we do not use any harsh chemicals, no chlorine, no bromine, no nothing like that. We use H2O2, which helps neutralize at the end of the night. And yeah, we just spend a lot of time cleaning. Obviously, before we got on this call, where did I come from? The float center. I was over there changing filtration systems, which we do weekly, so in terms of COVID, we didn't have to do too much. The only thing we kind of really needed to do was space our floats out a little bit and like cut down on floats. So we have 4 float cabins, and so instead of running 4 now, we do 3, so we can alternate them, like stagger how one gets work. One doesn't. There's always like a gap between each float tank. I don't know. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then our sauna is what we had to stagger the most. We really limited a lot of sauna sessions so we could really clean that and get it prepped for the next round and all that. But yeah, I mean, when you walk in, you can't even walk into our place with your shoes past the front door. You have to take your shoes off. You have to wear our sandals that we sanitize. Yeah, so we're very cleanliness about that.
Yeah.
And then but in terms of wearing a mask and stuff, everyone wears a mask when they come in, and we do masks with our tours and all that. But we advise people to not wear a mask when they go float. It's already really warm in the cabin, and so and like I said, those cabins have been turned over with the filtration system. We have massive industrial fans that suck all the air out in each room. That's just because of the humidity and all that. So it would not be good to have a mask on while you float. It would just be very hot and you couldn't breathe properly.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Just keep it clean like you always do, and maybe less people in there at a time. That
yeah,
totally makes perfect sense.
and that's the float center. We just don't have a lot of people in there.
Right.
Three people come in, and no one barely ever comes in at the exact same time. Those are your own room. It's your own room. One person in a room.
Yep.
You float, you shower, and you exit, and that's pretty much it. We did have to limit our tranquility room. If you remember, we have this nice room where you come out after a float, and that's one thing that does kind of suck right now. It's like that's a great space for people who just started floating to interact with other people who have floated. And we prided ourselves on having such a cool little space with teas and cookies and all these like snacks and stuff just to kind of hang out and talk with each other. And then we have we had all these journals for encourage people to write their experiences in. We have the float artwork on the walls by people who have done our artist program. So that kind of art, that room is kind of like doesn't get used much anymore, and it's sad because that's like a huge part of floating is afterwards. That we call it the post-float glow. Because people just want to talk about it and talk with other people.
Well, at least you've been able to stay open because I almost look at what you offer as essential, as it's helping people get through this. So the day will come where you get back to normal. Hopefully, the light's at the end of the tunnel on that here pretty soon.
Yeah, we had numerous calls where we were shut down. Like, we'd come in every day, just because there's things you have to maintain in the float center, even when you're shut down, because of the water and all that and the salt. And we just need numerous voicemails. Are you open? Are you open? I could really use the float right now.
I bet.
It's like,
well, on that note, in the 5 years you've been doing this, I'm sure you've seen so many people get better from floating, and just like you did. It's hard probably for you to recall any individual story, but can you remember maybe a few success stories, some things that just made you so happy to be doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I think the one of them was with Donovan, with the autistic child. I never, it didn't dawn on me that would benefit him and then other autistic children that had come in at the time when I was opening this, because I was more focused on mental clarity and meditation, and then with athletes as well. So that was really cool. That was really cool and touching. And then some of the people we've come in from who've had brain trauma. We had one guy who was driving 2 hours away to come down, and he would do it daily. And he had been in a bad accident, and just use it for healing. And then another guy who's a really good musician too. He was in a car accident and used floating to really heal his body mentally and physically. And then it was an interesting story. This was a couple of years back where a guy had been in there. He came in because his wife wanted to try floating. So he's like, all right, I'll try this. I didn't know this until after he came out of the float. And we were just kind of sitting, this is that tranquility room. We were sitting there talking, chatting, having some tea. It was a little slower afterwards, so I was able to chat with him. And I was asking, well, how was your float? And he's like, man, I'm just blown away. He's like, I came here with my wife just to come here to do something she wanted to do, and I've been suffering with, he had a rotator cuff injury I forgot how. I think maybe working, doing stuff, and he had needed surgery. And they told him, "You need to have surgery." He's like, he couldn't even move his arm up past a certain amount. And he said when he got out of the tank, he's like, "Look at this! I can't even believe I haven't been able to move my shoulder and all that up this far in over 6 months." He's like, I can't believe that sitting in there for 60 minutes did that for me. He's like, "That's amazing." You know, now that's a funny story that always sticks out to me, because he wasn't even, it wasn't even his thing. He didn't want to, he just came there to do it with his wife, and he was like, "All right, I'll do this and we'll go eat." And, you know, so stories like that. All right. And then you have people who come out and like, they'll just say, "Man, I just love this. Thank you so much for providing this for me," you know, and that's all they'll say.
Yeah, what a great thing for couples to do. Maybe make a date night out of it or something like that. Just try something different. I'm sure
Did
you
it
see a
all the
lot of
time. Yeah, people will come float, and then right afterwards they'll go right down the street and have dinner.
Well, I would love to create more success stories for you and get more people to try floating, Sean. So what's the easiest way for them to schedule an appointment or reach out to you for questions or whatnot?
The easiest way probably would be to call us. I don't know if you want me to give you a phone number or what.
Sure.
At 248-951-2634, or just go to motorcityfloat.com. And it's very easy to schedule there. Very simple. But you know, if you're not savvy with that, just give us a call, and there's always someone there ready to help.
Very good. Well, love the conversation. Very interesting topic, and hopefully more people try it out. It's just something different to get through these tough times right now. So, Sean, thanks again so much for joining us.
All right, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.